And Michaelis, yesterday you spoke about third worldism. Could you speak about this in a future video in more detail? Ah, there you go. Yeah, good. You just we're just chatting about it. So we're on the same vibe. But yeah, so third worldism it's just we saw it in the 60s. It started to, I think they were even calling it third. Well, I guess it was just called post-colonial studies back then. But the bottom line is it's a form of cultural Marxism that redefines the oppressor oppressed binary. So what makes Marxism is that the way the energy that drives social change is the pressure built up by the oppressive apparatus, the oppressive environment. Think of it as a pressure cooker, right? The oppressive environment of a dominant population on the oppressed population. So the population is made up of some kind of oppressor who's taking advantage of and exploiting the weakness of this oppressed population. And this oppressed population can't stand it and feels that it's wrong. They feel like their life choices are being snuffed out or being, inordinately limited, unlike the oppressor population who have abundant life choices. They can do whatever. They have a privilege that the oppressed population doesn't have. And then just the question is that's the framework. And when they break out of that oppression, when they lose their chains, society moves, society evolves. So the dynamic that moves society is this oppressor-oppressed binary. And the oppressor always breaks through. So this is what's known as progressive realism. It's a form of dialectical materialism. That's the technical term for it, that Marx argued for, that he borrowed from Hegel, the Wilhelm Hegel, the German philosopher, 18th century German philosopher. I think died in 19th century. But whereas the world inevitably moves through this breakthrough of the oppressed through the oppressor. The oppressor always ends up losing. The oppressed always ends up winning inevitably, because that's the dynamic. Because no matter how hard you oppress, all you do is increasing the pressure among the oppressed, and they will eventually break through. So it's known as progressive realism, that the arc of history always bends to the side of the liberal, or the emancipatory politics. And so now the question is just simply, okay, who are those who are the two populations? So for Marx, he understood the two groups of people economically, right? The bourgeois and the proletariat. The cultural Marxist sees them more culturally. So it might be whites versus blacks, right? Or it might be the colonizer versus the indigenous people, right? Or it might be heterosexuals versus LGBT, right? And then the way you solve that is not through economic means, but through cultural means. So, and sometimes it could be economic with reparations and all that sort of stuff, but it's more cultural means. So now we have to have pride. We have to have a special month for this oppressed group, and we have to have special flags, and we have to have special cultural accommodations, and we have to calibrate our sports around those biological males who identify with female and so forth. So it's not so much recalibrating our economy or our economic programs like Marx would argue for. It's now recalibrating our culture. That'd be a cultural Marxism. Third worldism is even more extreme. And what third worldism basically says is that everything American, everything Western, is inherently dominant and oppressive. And so anyone pushing back against it is a liberator. So that means literally, that means people who that means suicide bombers. That means October 7th Hamas murderers. That means people who take over airplanes, hijack airplanes, and so on. They're actually liberators. They're the good guy always. So that's why when that fellow threw the makeshift bomb in Manhattan in front of Gracie Mansion at these anti-Muslim protesters, when he threw that bomb, thank God it didn't go off. Mamdani, in his initial response and in every response since, has doubled down on, well, he only did that because there were white supremacists there. See, so that's this third worldism. Third worldism is all of the rage, all of the terrorism, all of the violence that we're seeing coming from the Middle East and so on is the pressure. It's the natural response of the oppressive, the oppressive practice of Western civilization and its racism and its history of racism and slavery and oppressing women and on and on and on and on. Now, of course, all of these groups you're pointing to would be infinitely guilty of all that sort of stuff, especially when it comes to the emancipatory crowd. How do Iranians treat women? How do Iranians treat gays and lesbians and transgender and so forth, right? I mean, it's good. It's like, but it doesn't matter because they're not thinking in those emancipatory terms. They're thinking in civilizational terms. Western civilization, evil, bad, it's oppressive. And as long as it exists, it will oppress because that's what it does by nature. So we actually have people who believe that. Somebody who believes that, and his wife, most particularly, is mayor of the largest city in the country. So it's very serious stuff. And they're learning it at universities. Universities are all in on this stuff. So unless they're the real sleeper cells, I like to say. Universities are the real sleeper cells. And unless they're taken care of, we're going to be right back here 20 years from now. So we're going to have to do something about this big time. But red states governors should step up to the plate. There should not be a single university in a single red state that's teaching this crap.